Welcome into Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Today on the show, why doesn't it feel better? Do the Falcons bring back Carter? And looking at the remaining Hawks schedule. It's all next. It's Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it starts now.
Hittin Hard is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We ask you to head to YouTube.com, put Locked On Sports Atlanta into your search browser. When you get there, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment. We are free and available to download on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get all of your favorites. Roku and Amazon Fire. Yes, you can find us on those platforms as well. And then give me a follow on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Listen to this stat about the Atlanta Hawks, okay? This is from StatMuse, that's a good source when you're looking at defensive ratings and, sorting things out and different things for the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, what have you. This is a tweet that they put out yesterday. The best defensive rating by a five-man lineup this season, a minimum of 300 minutes played together. Let me repeat that. The best defensive rating by a five-man lineup this season, minimum 300 minutes played. Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, Clint Capella. Let me repeat that. The best defensive rating by a five-man lineup this season, minimum 300 minutes, Young, Murray, Hunter, Collins, Capella. So let's put a little context into this. So this is from my buddy Brad Rowland over at Locked On Hawks. He says that there are 14 five-man lineups that have played at least 300 minutes this season together, okay? So not a crap ton, but not a bad sample size. Now, here's the question that I'll ask. Why doesn't it feel better? Why doesn't it feel like they've been the best five from a defensive rating standpoint when these guys are all together? Now, look, we've talked about it. Clint Capella's been a pretty good defensive player. John Collins has improved defensively. DeJounte Murray is a good defensive player, so he was automatically going to lift your defensive rating up as a team. But why doesn't it feel better? Hunter's, and maybe this isn't fair, but Hunter has not been a guy that's been a defensive standout. Now, to be fair, he's covering arguably, your top scorer. So I give him a little bit of leeway from that perspective, but Trae Young's not a really good defensive player, so that would drag you down. DeAndre Hunter's defensive rating isn't all of that great. We talked about on the show that the only guy that has a worse defensive rating than DeAndre Hunter is Trae Young. So why doesn't it feel better? Look, I've said many times on this show, their starting five can play with anybody. Well, the numbers bear it out. We know that they're a really good offensive team when that starting five is together. Oh, by the way, John Collins may not play on Friday. Gee, shocking, right? He's got the concussion issues and protocols and all that kind of stuff when they get back and they play the Cavaliers. And we'll talk about the schedule here in a little bit. But we know that they are a really good offensive team when these guys are together, right? When they have their starting five, they can play with anybody. They're a good offensive team. Why does it not feel like that they're still a good defensive team? The debacle, and maybe it's recency bias from the standpoint of the debacle in Charlotte where they give up 144 points, a season high, and then they come back and give up 122 to the Knicks on that Wednesday night heading into the All-Star game. And then, teams are scoring 23-pointers against them. And, the Knicks had 62 points, I believe it was, in the first half of their game. Charlotte had, I think it was 77 points in the first half. So in your final two games before the All-Star break, you've given up 266 points. And there feels like that there's a lot of those nights that are out there. Maybe it's just league-wide. Maybe the league is not as good defensively as what it was in decades past. Maybe teams are not built to be good defensive teams. They're built to be good offensive teams, right? A lot of three-point shooting, a lot of scoring in the league. Giannis is a 30-point scorer. Guys are 30-point scorers in this league. But it certainly doesn't feel like, and even if it's only 14 teams that you're comparing against, it seems hard to believe that the Hawks are the best defensive five that you can find among 14 teams that have played 300. And I'm even amazed that they've played 300 minutes together, given all of the injuries, given Hunter's injuries, Capella's injuries, Collins' injuries, DeAndre Hunter's injuries. I'm amazed that they even qualify for that number. But it doesn't feel like that this group has been a good defensive unit. I think DeJounte Murray has been a real spark on defense. And it's why I've talked about he's the MVP of this team. And Brad Rowland, who we had on a couple weeks ago, he said Clint Capella. Okay, that's two defensive-minded guys. That's two guys who played the best defense for the Atlanta Hawks. Right? So it's not coincidence that we look at the value for this Hawks team of defense. Yeah, Trae Young's the best player. Yeah, he's the best scorer. Yada, 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 yada. Trae Young doesn't play any defense, though. And that's why we look at, when we talk about most valuable player, I said Hunter, Brad Rowland said Clint Capella, and I can understand that. I understand both of those guys because their value is on both ends of the floor. But Collins has improved, but is Collins a defensive stopper? DeAndre Hunter hasn't lived up to, let's face it. DeAndre Hunter was the best on-ball defensive player coming out of college. I don't know if there was a defensive player of the ward in college basketball, but he was the best defensive player in college basketball coming out of Virginia. He was the best on-ball defender. Everybody acknowledged it. Why hasn't it translated? And then you would think that with Trae Young pulling the defensive rating down, that this team would certainly not be considered the best five. But it says a lot that, again, the underachieving nature of this franchise is just maddening. They're really good offensively. The stat on there is that they're the best defensive five among 14 teams. It's just maddening. What we said all year long, it's maddening what the Atlanta Hawks really are. They should be better than what their numbers belie, and their starting five can play with anybody in the league. All right, let's talk about my friends over at FanDuel. Listen, we're through the All-Star break. We're headed down the home stretch for the NBA season. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and it's time to download it today. So get in on the action. Hit the no-sweat first bet where you can win as much as $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel is a safe, secure, easy-to-use app. You can bet on everything from money lines to point spreads to prop bets. Everything is available to you. And FanDuel even lets you combine bets for a bigger chance to win with the same game parlay. So don't miss out on your chance. Hit the no-sweat first bet where you can win as much as $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't lose when you download FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. Learn more. Get in on the action with your no-sweat first bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. And besides making Hittin' Harder with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day, make sure you make Locked On Sports today your second listen. Biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available Spotify, Odyssey, YouTube, wherever you get all of your favorite podcasts from. So yesterday we saw from the Atlanta Falcons that they voided Lorenzo Carter's contract. So now essentially he's a free agent, right? He's available to be on the open marketplace. Should the Atlanta Falcons re-sign Lorenzo Carter? Carter did some decent things last year for this team, right? He had 4 sacks. He had the interception for a touchdown, right? He started all 17 games last year. He did some good things for this team. And basically, he cost you $3.5 million for his production, okay? If I could get Lorenzo Carter back for about the same number, $3.5, $4 million on a 1-year deal, I'll do that. But here's the only thing, though, okay? I like Lorenzo Carter. He did some nice things for this team. He can't start 17 games for you this year. Now, injury or something like that creeps up, but he can't start 17 games. It's got to be Ebiketie on one side and a number 1 draft pick on the other side. That's what this has to be. That we keep monkeying around and tinkering around and futzing around with what our defensive line is. It's Ebiketie on one side, a high draft pick, a first-round draft pick on the other side. That has to be your starting 2 on the outside. I like Lorenzo Carter. I'll bring him back. I'll put him in the rotation. You're always going to rotate your defensive line guys around, right? Unlike your offensive line, those guys are going to rotate in and out. And look, guys are going to get nicked up, dinged up, things like that. Okay, he can be a capable starter if he gets in there. But if I bring him back and I'm not paying him any long-term deal, I saw something that said 3 years at $15 million. Why would I sell Lorenzo Carter for 3 years at $15 million? Like, if that's his market value, out of here. Bye. See you. Low. Hasta lasagna. Don't get any on you. But if I can get him back for a year on a prove-it deal and at the same kind of money, again, $3.5 to $4 million, I'll bump it up to $4 million, because we've got all this cap space available to us now, right? But he can't start 17 games for you this year. And while I like his production, again, 4 sacks, that's second on the team, I believe, next to Grady. And he had some big moments in some games, right? The touchdown, the interception for the touchdown, couple of late game sacks where he kind of helped seal the deal. Him and Grady had some moments late in games. I'm not opposed to bringing him back. What I am opposed to, though, is the idea that he starts 17 games. And while we keep trying to figure out what we're going to be in life, we're not sure about what we are. We're cornerbacks and unicorns and wide receivers and outside guys that don't produce and things like that. And, all this other Michigan stuff when, we got to get great right by the football. When the football's put down on the ground, we got to get great right there, right? The closer to the football your players are great, the better your franchise will be. So I'm not opposed to having Lorenzo Carter back on this squad. I think he's a good veteran presence. He can play. He's capable. But starting 17 games for this team can't happen this year. And again, it's got to be Ebiketie, who, look, didn't barely start last year. Okay, you got to start him and turn him loose for 17 games. And then, again, I'm taking the 8th pick, and I'm finding my edge player, whatever the name is on the back of the jersey. Tyree Wilson, if he's available, he's probably not going to be there at 8. Miles Murphy, whatever. I don't care what the name is on the back of the jersey. They have to stand at that one defensive end, outside linebacker spot, whatever it is, edge player position, that they got a beeline for the quarterback. Here's what they got to do. Whoop, like this, right? Like this. A beeline for the quarterback. And go get him. But Carter's not a bad player. I think he'll have some value on the free agent market. I think that he's a guy that, if you're looking for a rotational guy who can sub in, who can also start, and maybe Carter's not just a Maybe Carter probably isn't for most teams, probably a 17-game starter, just given the nature of the league. You want to have two guys that can wreak havoc on quarterbacks, right? Like you want to have not just one guy. You want Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney, right? You want a duo like that. You want to have multiple guys that can get to the quarterback from the outside and put lots of pressure on, and then you free up guys in the middle, right? So I'll bring back Carter. Got to be right for the money. And by the way, the tag window is officially open, which again, they're talking Caleb McGarry, and that's $18 million. Not bringing Caleb McGarry back for $18 million. But I will bring back Lorenzo Carter. If it's a team-friendly deal and it's a one-year kind of show-me deal and it's about the same money, not paying him $5, $6, $7 million to do what he's got to do, because he's going to be a rotational player on this team. And I'll make that rule clear to him. Would love to have you back. You're going to make about the same money. You're not going to play the same amount of snaps. I think he played like 75% of the snaps for this team. You're not going to play the same number of snaps, not going to play the same percentage, and you're certainly not going to start 17 games. If we're willing to have that honest conversation where we line up two guys on the outside that go get the quarterback, then I'll bring him back for team-friendly money and a good deal. All right, besides making Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day, make sure you make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. It's the biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available Spotify, Odyssey, YouTube, wherever you get all of your podcasts from. So let's look at the Hawks' remaining schedule. 23 games left in the season. So as it kind of breaks down, you got a couple of games at home against Cleveland. That'll start Friday night. First game back will be Friday night, home with Cleveland. Got a couple of games at home against Cleveland. Well, they're one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. You got a home and home with Boston. All right. They're the best team. And either them, it's flip a coin. Either they're the best team or Milwaukee's the best team. So the good news is you don't play Milwaukee, but you got home and home with Boston. You've got 4 games against Washington, who's literally right on your tail. They're right on your coattails. You got a couple at home, couple on the road. The road series is one of those things where you play one night on the road, take a day off, then play them right back again on the road. So 2 games in a row that you play them in their building. So you've got a couple with Brooklyn. You've got a couple at Miami, where you do that. One game against Miami, day off, game again against Miami. Then you've got some Western Conference teams in this mix. Portland, Golden State, Dallas, Minnesota, Memphis. All those teams are at home. Okay? Then you go to the West Coast, the Western Conference. The 2 teams that you got to play yet are San Antonio and Minnesota. Okay? So that's 2 very winnable games right there. And then you get a mix of at home, 3 total games, where once against Philly, once against Indiana, and then the dreadful, literally the worst team in the NBA, or at least in the Eastern Conference, Detroit Pistons, who, by the way, you're 3-0 against the Pistons, 1-3 against the Charlotte Hornets, but 3-0 against the Detroit Pistons. And then you have a game against Chicago. So of the 23 games left, I think it's 14 at home that you have. Can the Hawks go at least 13-10? Look, at this point, when you look at where the standings are, okay? So as we sit here today and we get ready for the second half of the season, Hawks are in the number 8 spot. There are 3 games out of the 6th spot, and they're 3.5 games, 3 games out of the 7th spot, 3.5 games out of the 6th spot. But the Wizards, who are 9th, are only a half a game out of the Hawks. And the Raptors, who we don't play down the stretch here, they are 1 game behind the Hawks. So you've got teams that are fairly close to you, right in front of you, but you got 2 teams that are nipping right on your heels that, look, These games against Washington are going to be big. This is not an easy stretch. Cleveland, Boston, Brooklyn, Washington, at Miami, Golden State, Memphis, Dallas, Philadelphia, Indiana, at Chicago. This is not an easy 23-game stretch. And given the fact that the Hawks are, wildly inconsistent, their only thing that's consistent is their inconsistency. Hawks are only 15-12 at home. That's been a disappointment. 14-18 on the road this year, 17-19 in the conference. Can the Hawks go 13-10 down this stretch and find themselves at the end of the day a couple of games above 500? Because right now, obviously, the Hawks are sitting at 29-30, so they're not even 500 yet. Can they get 13-10 and get a couple of games above 500? That will probably get you 8 or 9 in the seeding, right? Now, the benefit of having the 8 seed, either the 7 or the 8 seed, I'm not even counting on the 6 seed at this point, because it's unrealistic to say that, they can go 15-8 in their last 23. What tells you that the Hawks are going to do that? Like, there's nothing about the Atlanta Hawks that has said that they can go on this kind of run. Do they have the personnel and the pieces and all this kind of stuff? Yeah. And again, maybe John Collins doesn't play Friday night, already talking about injuries and things like that. But if they can go 13-10, get a couple of games above 500, they probably stay in that 7-8 range. Why is that better than the 9-10? It's all play-in tournament. Well, again, the way the play-in tournament works is if you're the 7-8 seed, you win that game when the 7 and 8 seed play one another. When you win that game, you're automatically the 7 seed come the first round of the actual playoffs, okay? When you're the 9-10 seed, you've got to win 2 games just to get into. So you got to win the 9-10 seeded game, and then you play the loser of the 7-8 seed, and that gets you the 8 seed. That's what the Hawks did last year. That's how they got the 8th seed, right? So at least you only have to win one play-in game, and if you win it, you can, and again, at the end of the day, look, either Milwaukee or Boston, both of those teams are going to be the 1-2 seed, right? We expect fully that Boston or Milwaukee are going to be the 1-2 seed in the Eastern Conference. Neither one of those teams is a good matchup for the Hawks. I don't care if the Hawks end up with the 7 seed, the 8 seed, when it's all said and done. Neither one of those teams is a good matchup. And frankly, I don't think the Hawks get past winning a series against either one of those teams. Milwaukee's been outstanding. They got Holiday. Middleton's been back. They've been on a big roll, right? Boston's the deepest team in the NBA. They've got 2, outs. I mean, look, Jason Tatum has had an outstanding year for them. I don't see how the Hawks match up very well with either one of those teams. And you can miss me with the whole, well, roll the dice and anything can happen. We know how this is going to end. But at least if you can get to the 7-8 seed, you can only have to win one play-in game. And then if you even lose that first game, you still have a shot to make it up from there. So if the Hawks can go 13-10, I think they can find themselves in the play-in. That'll put them 2 games above 500, which right now, when you look, the Hawks are sitting at 29-30. The Wizards are 28-30. The Miami Heat are 5 games above 500, so they're 32-27 right now. So that will probably keep you in that same kind of range over the Wizards, over the Raptors, and things like that. Yeah, the expectations are low because, again, I've not seen it out of this team. I can't sit here and tell you that they have a 15-8 in them, a 16-7 in them. They have done nothing to this point to take advantage of what their schedule is. They didn't do it when they had those 19 games at the end of the calendar year. They didn't take advantage of any point of their schedule this season. So why would I believe now when it's Cleveland, Boston, Brooklyn, Washington, Miami, Golden State, Philly, Like, why would I expect them to take advantage of the schedule now? Why would I expect them to all of a sudden just flip that magic switch? All the same issues are there. Coaching, players, heart, whatever. All the same issues are there. Why would I expect them to flip this thing on and all of a sudden set the NBA on fire? Do they have the capability to be a 15-8 run? Maybe. But I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that they're a 15-8 or 14-9. Just be 13-10 down the stretch and take it for what it is. That's probably your lot in life. That's probably where, if you can, again, be in that 7 to 8 seed range, that's all I'm factoring on. This idea of, well, we can get to 6 and we're only 3 games back. Okay, they're 3 games back. It might as well be 100 games back. I mean, based upon what this team has done, based upon the fact that they can't get on a run, based upon the fact that they've stunk it up all year, none of this is a realistic scenario. All the same issues are there. Nate McMillan's going to coach out the year. They're not firing Nate McMillan, bringing in an assistant coach. They're not changing up anything. Your roster is what your roster is. Banged up, beat up, whatever. So 13-10 to me is that target number. 13-10, and that should get you either a 7 or 8 seed in the playoffs, and then we'll roll the dice from there, and we'll see what happens. It's not a good place to be. My buddy Sam Mitchell used to always talk about the worst place you can be is in that 7 to 8 range, because you're just good enough to get in the playoffs, but you're not really in title contention. You're not really at the top of the elite teams, and you're not really in a spot to get yourself over the hump. Being in that 7 to 8 spot really is no man's land when it comes to the draft, when it comes to the franchise, when it comes to what your lot in life is. It's not a place to be. So, again, hopefully it's a 13-10 stretch. If it's better, awesome. We'll be on board, and we'll take everything over 13-10. But if it's 10-13 or something like that, there's a definite chance that the Hawks may not even make it to the play-in round. And that would be, again, given the fact that, the Bulls, Pacers, Magic, Hornets, and Pistons aren't in the play-in round, I would think that it would pretty much be a lock that we should be a play-in team. It's just a matter of 7, 8, 9, 10. Where do we fall with all of that? All right, thank you so much for making Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day. Make sure you make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Biggest stories of the day, instant reaction, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available Spotify, Odyssey, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. We ask you to head to youtube.com, put Locked On Sports Atlanta into your search browser. When you get there, hit that subscribe button. Trying to grow to 6,000 folks on our YouTube page. Pretty remarkable that it's been less than a year that we've been around. So climbing towards 6,000 every day. Be a part of our ever-growing community. We are free and available to download on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get all of your favorites. Roku and Amazon Fire. Check us out on those platforms as well. And then give me a follow on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Back with you tomorrow. This has been Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.